I'm soaring, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov, and our today's broadcast will be transparent to the fact that you are developing according to the so-called SOAP process. According to the toe of the plan, I have asked for American President Donald Trump, and by her, we will become the days of the so important discerning rounds, both in the United States and in Europe, and between Ukrainians and Europeans. Yesterday, this is how you decided that I, having said the sovereign for those received in the state in Marco Ruby, needed to connect Russia to those situations. And the most for those special presented to the president with received in the state of Stephen Withov, neck escort, taking the president with received in the state of Jared Kushner rules to the Russian capital, for from the president of Russia Putin. And with the trimming of the bucket divided into two groups, the yaks were tied with a shade and what could be richly who seemed to be present herself is not boring, on those from the oyster chain. Serious intelligence go even Americans with Russians easier. The result is that I'm richly rich. Before my father-in-law Trump is declared below Tilke and in and about real relationships. Well, it is known in such situations, it is obvious that Moscow has developed the understanding of those propositions. Yaki has stuck out with the Ukrainian delegation since receiving the state. And it seemed that absolutely nothing was needed. As you know, I'm in other groups. Still and nothing can zack. Now the seams are sewn in a fool on the Tilka Withov. And Kushna, that Putin beggars are not even bilch of the principled propositions from the received states, will be characterized. I can't accept them yet. The Russian side is out, and the Kremlin is listening to their result and to the application. And Vitev, having appointed to write to her Zustrichi with Putin, visited with the President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky in Europe. It is also obvious to him to pass the results and enter the logic of the so-called seam diplomacy. So we talk to the Ukrainians, talk to the Russians about theirs about the same positions on the Ukrainians. Then again we dilute with the Russians, and so that I open the real result. And everything is in place due to the fact that there was no president of Ukraine in the state, with a special spacer of the president received. And on the subject of the whole story, in principle, finished off. To Vitkov turned to the staff received in mind with Jared Kushner. For those who are torn apart by the fact that Putin just talked with the respect with the essence of the problem. And I respect the essence of the problem. And the American representatives respect the essence of the problem, completed by the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. Then, Putin respects the very fact of the foundation of Ukraine by the essence of the problem. Allegedly, the Americans do not allow him to be driven to his power. Absolutely massacres look at hundreds, and according to the American Svetum, hundreds of Putin's problems. And will be the head of the assessment in the variation. TP, we did not know the Minister of the Transcordial Affairs of Ukraine, Andrei Sibir, that the Americans are with the Russians both positively and for the last Ukrainian delegation before Washington. Which can mean, and on the truth, which says, and seriously, what I call the spirit of Anchorage. And with the reference spirit of Anchorage, and the Russians are covered for us with a fiasco, Ghana, and for the president. With the Zustriches received in the state of Donald Trump and Putin's Russian Ochilnik in Alaska. What is the spirit of Anchorage? Trump and Putin come out before journalism. The song is absolutely fruitless from the oyster. Now I think Putin was absolutely embarrassed about his American one. He just endures his physical condition richly 4 years. Putin, having read to journalists and climbed into a short lecture from history, ran out of Russian-Ukrainian guilt. I'm going to another row now. Go oyster with Trump. The frustrated Trump, having told reporters that it was not possible to equip the equipment so far. And out came the journalists who did not lead to a greedy test, climbed into Alaska in the eyes of their profitable sensations. So at Trump, I have to give out my psalm. That's also where I'm unhappy. You haven't given in to them yet, but she didn't give in and showed, let's say, resentment of the delegations. And talks about a wide warehouse about Russian-American economical exchange and skinny. You didn't see Putin off with a bang, but I caught him chasing everyone with money received in the Trump state. The Russian Achelnik magnificently descended from the ladder of his face of the lord of the situation, sweeps. Well, already at the Imperius or so, and Alaska flies to Washington, and you know richly. Trump is all tame for the flight to zoo, and having started to unpack, how successful was his oyster with Putin. And having got married, and practically all the American press, all the media, all the TV channels, characterized the oyster obvious for the skin, I would say with a slave. I'm just at a healthy angle on the president's order with the received in the state. Not, of course, not for the presidency. And so Trump continued to believe in this idea of what is not true. And I, having said Trump himself at yesterday's final meeting of the same American row, are 3 times right, and 3 times everyone is right. And everything will become psychological. Nicola is not washed in what I insert, it is visible and simpler and concepts. Well, I will repeat from the TP, this is the same situation. Verkov and Kushner became conceited in Moscow of the humiliating fiasco in Putin. I read them a lecture of hearts, and choose both American, and my ideas about positions. So, maybe it's there for Putin to call all the other points, I'm not yak not to finish the blame, but there is no value. The fact that the situation itself I'm senile. Of course, the Americans are not talking to the Russians about Pripyat not fire, but often on the idiotic spirit of Anchorage. And for the fact that talking about Pripyat is not fire, and tightness on Russia, and on the economy, so that Russia can just shoot. I said classes. We have been discussing such articles for years, and it is possible to talk about Tenraki in the field for another year. Extremely in the whole situation, Tilky Putin will be heard. The fact that Putin loves spending on ideas. Vinci showing the same in the castle, and News 2020 other what has changed? Nothing. And the bugs continue to clean the cactus. So I think that the American delegation from the Ukrainian delegation in Washington will be the same. They will unravel, and the failures have been achieved. They check the Ukrainians in mind, the Russian propositions in Ukraine. The dots I have been packed up to those schemes of the so-called SOAP plan, and discussed by the American-Ukrainian delegation. The Ukrainian delegation will again be asked to torture the Americans in the form of conduct. And why are the Ukrainian troops overestimating the territory of the Donetsk region? The Russians can't win 4 tilkas to what Trump predicts the Russians will chip in early and conquer. And with what kind of Ukrainians on the supplies in the warranty side with those received in the state? And what about these guarantees? And I will also look frozen, and with a Russian loan, and I will look visible in Ukraine on the Kola, we will get the end of hostilities. For all these trials, the Americans on the shadow of the Vidpovedi and talk. It is possible for his turns, and a bunch of them will go to Putin again, that is, we will read them a lecture again. Well, again, the sharks' attempts to fasten the American spacers once again before a frolic and a saint with the Russian president. They are not yet, as we know, politically holy, both in the United States and in Russia itself, freezing, well, for a simple period. That is, I would say from the 24th according to the American flower calendar, we have in truth from the 15th day of the Khan. Well, up to respect up to for the second cold in Russian. Federation. Someone who respects R2 more in this Ustane for 10 to 12 days can theoretically, and it is possible to ruin the Americans. So I will go through cola with minerals. That cola will end the world, no one gives up about the peace plan. And the order of the Danes is tied up firm the Russian-Ukrainian guilt, and what can be said, and are just frequent on the political show memorize Trump. Yuri Ushakov, the relatives of the President of Russia, are tortured by foreign policy. I, who was entrusted with this whole story, spoke today from the power statements tied from the Maybutny wiring of the podium. In the Russian-American dialogue. And it was also important in those applications. I am in the application of a senior Russian official, Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov. Russians for the sides are not elected from American propositions, and the sister does not want to cook the side either. In addition, the Russians will prove that Putin is not visible to the American persuasion. No, just a consultation. And Namagini position. But once again, I have not, and will continue to be absolutely imperious and Putin. There will be so animals and leather there for 3 or 4 months. Another important point. What Ushakov says is that they dilute Tilky with the Americans. And with the Europeans they do not dilute, the Europeans are not amicably on what water. And the Russians will lose their constructive bottles. And do not get up without constructive. Well, it means on the conscience of the Europeans, although starting and adequate, and bilch the situation on the front line, on the ground. And so he talked it over with the Americans and all these tortures, and in the hall. He dilutes Tilky with the Americans, but they did not reach. It's just that they have such a reception for an hour with an American, and with the Trump team in Ukraine, the results. The results are not allegedly not. Well, in fact, the essence of what else happens in the topic of dialogue. An important point, and so it is necessary to say. The Europeans take the fate of Tilky from Russia, and I'm just kind, because I'm respectful with the Russians, there's nothing to talk about. Shuka, in order to travel across Ukraine with a budget of 2026-2020. There I'm also at the guessing Ukrainian parliament for a budget with a deficit. And the goal of the deficit is you, of course, and covered Zahid knew you. Overgrown we already know, and today I have claimed the European Commission's von der Leyen service. Even before I have covered to expenses for Ukraine's financial needs of €2 billion, with a need of €136 billion and covered by international partners. To solutions for the European Union loan. The solution may have fallen on Tilka one voice, and another solution is the so-called reparative loan, where there will be a penny of frozen Russian assets in the European Union. And the decision can be made by praising and voting, so-called qualified, for that the Prime Minister of cleaning Viktor Orban, that the Prime Minister of the word Robert Fitz may have an appetite for such a decision. For voting such a decision you decide to vote about it, and their non-votes will mean nothing. Well, the PPR torture of the yak will be for these pennies on the budget of Ukraine, and here they will already be breeding these tools. And so that Ukraine can survive in prices for a simple hour of support and a friend of the Vi. Well, yes, the Europeans have a two-handed plan. It means about the realism of European perception. That no one will punish the completed guilt up to 2020 mines. Everything is already, of course, that richly the guilt has come to an extremely high. Russia will overestimate the economic potential for continuation, and demographic potential for continuation of the guilt of real serious problems. And the advantage of the Russian president to conceive about the completion of guilt, we can be washed behind it for a simple reason. That Putin can and is visible with the real situation of the power economy, still on the truth, everything can be and richly. In principle, it did not go further and further. The arms of the surviving confrontation between the two armed ones are wide and wide. But there is such a geopolitical reality. Europeans are talking about the fact that they are elected for two hands to help Ukraine on a budget. One important signal of the Russian Federation. What will happen and the bombing of Ukraine, that is, the infrastructure of Ukraine and the economy, will not allow Ukraine to develop normally. Europe will be in Ukraine so that Ukraine gives you operas. There were no bright illusions yet that Ukraine is economically possible. Europe will help Ukraine, and you will equip your degenerate economy, because we will work. And we will still be your energy carrier for Ukraine from the problems of Kola, and will continue to buy your energy. And I am a respected food on the right pit to the right, with a single correct approach to the right. That's the economic collapse of Russia. Kind of like a neighboring power will not be able to normally statues on their feet against Sprat's speech. The economy of Russia is Maya, and is driven into such a blind corner, that the Russian will not be able to find normal grounds against God. And I will be engaged in Tilky imperious survival. The Tilka of survival of an extraordinary Russian for embroidery has been scaled up to tens of millions of people, and will not be able to find himself in power in Ukraine. Maybe their aggressive ambitions are not. So you will say there will also be in the army that financial ones are bitten. But it happens for pennies. And I'm not going to pay the Nyman yet. And I am also conducting a formal mobilization. Putin is not in a hurry to understand them yet. He has a social contract with the Russian one before the world. We recruit for pennies those who do not purify our Ukraine in lumpy and important things. And you respect us to fight on the whiskey enterprises of the Russian Federation for a penny sold. And we have a miracle for someone else's blood, on the blood of Ukrainians, as we drive in and for their land, and on the blood on the lum. We dispose of the fact that we do not need them. I'll let Callan bend his back. I'm nafta and gas. 4 pennies, you can pay in the fishing complex of the Russian Federation, which has brought down with skin guilt the demands for scaling those guilt, including in Europe. Still, in Europe, the holidays have already been discussed. Yesterday's captured Putin's words that Russia is extremely ignorant of fighting from Europe. She's ready. Lisbon to Vidnia. To Warsaw. So here I am not yet visible to Maya in May to conduct payments for Neyman products. Then you are with the real mobilization of the Hromadians, and do not adore your brother in the fate topic. They adore with posterigati for the occupation of the sacred Crimea. Nabob for Russians instead of Ukrasnormisk. So Terzat, and continue to call Pokrovsk for their canapes. That's really the cottage speech does not come true. And I also respect the head moments tied to our understanding of how to accept guilt. The workshop of the economic, demographic, and social potential of the Russian Federation, and a demonstration with the West of Petra's readiness for Ukraine is absolutely necessary. I'll be ready for style before Vienna. Here. It is already known who will go from the received states to the outpouring of President Trump, from Rustem Mayers, Andrei Ignatov. Taxi. Who needs for those to continue to blur with the person and President Trump and overgrown with the words of the Ukrainian president, and the understanding of what was expressed in the days, we will get up and go. By what rank the reality of actions in this we do not yet know with you. And we also know that having said the President of Finland Alexander Stupa, and talking about the most recent days and Kola, it will be possible to talk about what the participants of the conflict managed to do from the wrong side accidentally, on the Reguliva itself. What did we manage to do here on Unfair Minds for Ukraine? I still want to accurately procite his interview. And Kapustin's goal, as you know, is playing with Donald Trump Wolf. He says that he was disappointed, having beaten the Myar plan. Finns are also ready to ensure that for a fair mayor in Ukraine, they will not be fulfilled for the European Union, and so that the territorial integrity of Ukraine is preserved in the peace process. The reality was that we could be both good and a compromise. The reality is also that I am such that we Finns are ready until the moment about and everything to the fair mayor so richly said. It will become 4 hands. Obviously it may not be you. And Tesh, obviously, is such a thought of the Finnish president. Even before the NP, Trump in the hall knew about the plan about 28 points, and you respect it was not like that at all. But we don't know Nicola. And having respected him, to the edge unacceptable, and educated for Ukraine. In the American project, Finland was so confused in the context of the guarantee, and the Finns, of course, fucked Finland with Kim Chin. The fact that we have the largest strong forces in Europe is already a miracle. So, in the dark, we can also talk about the fact that we are still bashing European politicians, I would say conducting real contacts with the received states. Tesh is about not bashing minds for real justice. I'll say it again. I think that the situation there is up to the 20th numbers of the breast, but it's just too high, and it may already be. That you and I simply do not know the process of the plan of nothing. There will also be an absolutely different order of DNA, tied up and with a wiring, for injections of Russian-Ukrainian guilt. So that's what you right mind can be. And we are talking about a rose for a skin day, so on a vulgar plan, that we have real ones. With you at the apple tree pro podi, Yaki may be the famous Cheka of guilt. Tesh absolutely real speech is still talking about you can develop, without trying to believe, that we will really be able to chat with you. A realistic peace plan. The torment is that we will be able to. I am ready to the point that you will be on the injection to solve the problems of Russian-Ukrainian guilt in the greatest possible way. We can also follow up with you so that for a shot, what I am doing in such detail on the tortures of the finances of our Ukraine. In the 2026 kind, because we are on the exuding sexual budget, so that no one has any illusions. The torture of what Ukraine is fighting. And the torture turned out to be on the very subject of the European Union. In the forms and in the Yaki Buddha, I will help Ukraine in it. Of course, Ukraine cannot fight without a budget. The epic we are going to talk with you about the humiliation of Russia, then we can do it ourselves, and torture for discounts for ready-made. With our Visnaz Vrakovaya torture, of support by the Russian riddle on the side of the Ukrainian people, torture of real ones. I want what I want. For the most Europeans. And I think Putin will give richly that good ready to fight from Europe skin time. Putin's chair Ukraine is ready to fight with Ukraine and the European Union, with Ukraine and NATO on the European continent. To the Europeans that they are not helping us, but protecting the powerful. And by ensuring such decisions of the mayor's plan with such a rank, my actions will be unfair and secure for Ukraine as well. And knocked out sociology. Another half of Ukrainians are ready to protest, will be really insecure. The only thing I would say to a non-guarantor is that we are ready for repeated wars in it. Well, today's would say, but tying with the Russian-Ukrainian guilt other processes. No one's saying that we will complete the broadcast again on the radar of President Trump. I think that he speaks at once about what happens in the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. To PPR, I will ask you to subscribe to the channel of those who are subscribed to the airwaves, and I will be your Dayak. I'm guessing revolts on the air that we are going to the channel millions. We have completed literally 11,000 in order for the channel to become millions of channels. And we can say already heaps of respects for both a souvenir and a gift. So I ask you, those who have not subscribed, sign it. I will be in your Diaknaya because of your Padobeki, the same for your comments. What do you think about away from the wiring of the soap process and absolutely entered? Tell me, I myself am the most realistic scenario of a rose of wine on a beer, and comes out from your point of view. I will not reach the greedy breakthrough of the peace process, the order will be guessed at the beer of guilt. There will be positive battles on the front line. So the Russians can buy items on can't can't stand on those front lines. On the injection Pokrovka continue these fights. There will be continued shelling of Ukrainian territory from Russian drone missiles, mass shelling will often be knocked out. And the Ukrainian energy infrastructure will continue with a sample. They will still end there, and I will not get into the subject. It is not expensive for the Russian Federation to get such attacks. Continue in the fishing complex in the Russian Federation, accumulating discharges for the offensive guilt of proto-European Ukrainians. Ukraine at the automotive testing complex of the Russian Federation. It is necessary to spoil the entire infrastructure in order for Russia to cut pennies. These strikes against the Russian tanker fleet, allegedly in the seas, and sanctions strikes, control of ships and the fleet, will be watered down. Maybe by American sanctions against the Russian Federation. The fault of the routine, I would say, will sound for those four, and will sound for the offensive, that I am not Bachu in the offensive. I will not be not me and the washing process, but I am not Bachu by us today. Just continue for rocks and it can go on. Clever. I do not know where I admit that we can add up in 4 months. And it's not a routine, and we're not to blame for it. I'm not sticks at the front, discounts are high. Oh God, arm Ukraine. Ukraine wants to survive Russia, Russia wants to survive Ukraine. All the logic, but the accents are also to blame in the rear. Because the Russians, of course, she can't bury anything with Vyskov Shlyakov. You are developing technologies now. It is possible to lead less, and he does not want Ukraine on a deserted wasteland. And we want to go to the wasteland, energetically. Here is the logic of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt of the 20s and maybe the 30s. And I think that in the 2026 kind of wine, we can scale an hybrid wine of the Russian Federation, of European percussion whiskey technology. Alexander Stupa, the president in Finland, says that Ukraine has unfavorable minds. Plus Italy is purchasing the reset. Well, Italy, I do not take the entire program of the non-governmental budget, but also on the fact that the best often there will really find an understanding of something beyond the fault of the Italians, and Groshina on Vikova Ukraine. So Tesh absolutely can be in it from the point of view of clearly not Talitsa, about what the Kola President Stupka said. And it does not give up that I am you that President. And not so I am saying that the Finns and ready to the point that not everyone is smarter than the mayor about 4 hands. Maybe you are. I'm in Zagolany Bach imagining the counselor that the guilt could end on what fair wines could end on fair minds. On the mind of a fair mayor, so that we went to the cordon of 1991st lesson, defended them, and could be added to the fire with the Russian Federation with such a rank. Wine. Russian troops are on the territory of Ukraine. Continue to attack points from all over Ukraine in the environment, cannot end Tilky on unfair minds. Well, it's not in illusions that the blame is on unfair minds. It is unfair that the Russians keep control of themselves on frequent Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian neutrality is unfair. The torture is that the yaks will unfairly have a fair mayor here, do not forget for the ruin and the fair mayor of the Russian Federation, and the collapse of the state machines. There are no objective reasons for the tag today. It is possible to sound a chick and conclude a fair torture in someone who will be laid on a political map retinue. Then Trump has blocked Ukraine, it is not yet time to end the war before the midterm elections, and about me. I do not give the infection of Trump on the Vidnost of Ukraine. And Trump is proud that the Americans are sticking out on. I respect the strategic washing received in the state. Washing the presidency. You fold it from the washes. And I think historians will give the entire presidency a diligent tick through no fault of the screen. You know that Trump won the Nobel Prize, and in what an NP. I'm still Trump on Ukraine. Types of exchange of information, developments of sanctions against Russia. That's it, I'm going to talk to Putin. Well, Putin's cards are covered, I'll have cards for him. So it's not Trump of Ukraine, but I'm still talking about the midterm elections. I think the Republicans will really lose them. We want more, because I got up a serious lesson, and on my political priorities. Then I will continue to control the Congress richly until the elections. Vitaly, you said even Pershi, then Trump's clip of the one that Putin can't in the round. The fact that the Russians themselves say that they are not ready, and the consultative process with the Americans. I have made comments to all Kremlin officials and am preparing for the negotiation process. So I don't adore. For that is, the Americans will be rich in their dialogues with Putin, supposedly, and need reason. Putin will lose another Trump period, will say that Putin does not adore the world, will continue to go for the American sanctions against Russia. This, of course, is also a cordon of sanctions. That journalists will test Trump, why the propaganda of Biden Ukraine fought the territory under the most decent Trump Ukraine joining. And cancer became the strongest. But Trump can pakla pavidality on not on the spa in Ukraine, and soon became, and I think that Trump will pop out. I would say understanding is still needed to see povists in such situations. And Trump will absolutely clearly say that the most to what was clear. There was also wine, and it was necessary to finish God's supposedly dream of Ukraine. And it turns out that the demographic temple potential of the Russian Federation, Ukraine is now fighting, and seams are being planted. A challenge for Trump. About the causes of the conflict. In May, on the was of Ukraine, on anti-Russia and aggressive Ukraine, I cruised for the relaxation of Russia. And a respectful tilka in Ukraine with a political map retinue. And I will come not from historical Russian lands to Russia, what Russian deputies and Russian propagandists are talking about. And I will eliminate the causes of the conflict. This is that the reason for the conflict of the 24th with 1995. The Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine voted our independence, and on 1995. Is wide about to the disappointment of the important Russians Ukrainians follow in the referendum. I note that this was a shock for the Russian. Even before the decision of the Ukrainian parliament, it was put calmly there, perhaps, that the Ukrainian people Nikola did not break fraternal with the Russian people. For important Russians, from the very day Ukrainians pretended to need it. And the Ukrainians themselves are rich in Rocky, in not notified, and I accept in Russia. And they haven't notified our country yet. Russians accept economically, politically. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm saying Putin to Europe from Russia is ready to fight. To that, I still have Ukraine as a friend. I will have a bag from Russia ready for Russia before eating. For Russia, Ukraine. Food for Ukraine in Russia potentials for not ostensibly, so that all the wine came from Navi frozen on the rich in conflict. Nesna Nikola, not again and again. And the cutaneous, who is full of guilt, let's say there is the worst hour that guilt is funny. I don't like the chances that it was otherwise, explaining the Russian people's ambitions. Nikola has not been since 1990. There was no such day. Well, no one believes it anyway. I'm right, there are no reasons why Putin has galoshes mobilization. Through marriage, finance wants lumpen. I think Putin and galoshes are mobilizing. I myself believe that we are talking about a social package in the Russian Federation. Putin has tried this reference mobilization without and marks in the rick of Russian-Ukrainian guilt. Russia has completed 1 million people. There was a Reid referendum. The Russians have shown that they do not love to fight. And the Russians of the exhibition in the Kremlin, so that they perfectly understand even in that situation. Really post firm normal social stability in Russia, that you will be driven into the army by the Ukrainians. This is an important moment. They are tied up with the fact that they are injected with Russian-Ukrainian guilt and with knowledge. So Putin will instruct and mobilize with all his might. Although I am still a Russian general, it turns out that I am ready for total mobilization, what they have won 3 times and turned off. For the Rakunak of local assaults. It's a rumor. Our grandfathers are about grandfathers, about the important bill of those who looked over the air in those local assaults. Now a friend of light guilt. And local assaults were organized, and I'm starting Marshal Georgy Zhukov. And you end up less and less called Marshal Vaughn, and didn't seem to know January. You know, a wonderful anecdote once by General Dwight Eisenhower and Marshal Georgy Zhukov, near Eisenhower, I torture Zhukov. I am the Kim Chinam army, we are warming up and not the fields. Well, I'm like launching a platoon for them. Extremely anecdote, an anecdote absolutely in reality. And there was a Nagata for the Rudinsky army in Persia. The role of Rocky Guilt was found by the Requins. So the title of the charge detachments were formed with a reference marshal of the Rudinsky Union, Lavrenti Berry. I formed a call from the NFT because until that moment, until the wrong Radian soldiers, it was obvious that I was going to shoot detachments into the barrier in order to storm. So the rank of Rudinsky commanders of strategy tactics could not organize in Zagolin, allegedly, and as a result, there were tens of millions of victims of mediocrity, and on the competence that he knows. And 40 million victims, and Ma post commander. And I will absolutely clearly show the story of another light guilt of the brachial sprat of the victims. Radio, German, British and American. All on after all with German victims on jealousy. And I'm chatting on the network of Russian generals. I went into a chat in the Russian temple academies. He's in a chat right on Marley. And I read them. We don't pass all the Marchand memoirs come out as a child of mediocrity and cruelty. These Napoleons of hearts. Well, there's an uprising, but you are still releasing the president with the state-obtained Donald Trump. By leading the pro in the Kremlin, and by leading the process of Ukrainian repatriation, after I turned to Washington, it is notified. Here. Oyster is called retail productive, although absolutely at once, as serviceable productivity. TPPR we will be chica away from the wiring of the go. Let's check the reaction of the President of the United States Donald Trump, and who seems to have primates on the pulse. And a pulse? The pulse is normal, respectful of all these monsters. So the hand in such situations, and the pulse, I would say, kind of visible. View by prominent moment. We don't give up, that's understood. But the express pulse is 78. As the pulse increases, write in the comments. And I will finish our today's grinding on the topic. I thank you for being in the dark ether. I ask you to subscribe to the channel that tells us we heard ticks 12,000 to a million, so be with 12,000. Please. Challenge in gave Podobeki, so that they could limp, who at once cannot sign with the inclusion and light throughout our Ukraine. What do you think about the removal of a different process from the channel, and in the niche, Pro helps the Ukrainian reset forces? At the proven fees. I'll tell you more. Ukraine's reset is the guarantor of our sovereignty, and on the feet of the temple confrontation.